All right, welcome to the Student Athlete Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lemke. Y'all, this is going to be a good one. This is one of those podcast episodes that everyone can apply something from. Not only that, but you're going to want to listen to this more than once because this is one of those things that you need a continued reminder of to help you mentally succeed. This is one of those things that separates the good athletes from the great athletes. You know, this is what separates the Tom Brady's from the Drew Bledsoes, the Steph Curry's from the Andrew Wiggins, the Aaron Judges from the countless of minor league players who did not last in the majors. Honestly, this is what separates a lot of the Power Five athletes from a lot of the D3 athletes. It's the mind. And so I'm really excited to bring on Adalyne. Adalyne is a mental skills consultant and certified breathwork specialist. Adalyne works with athletes from youth to the pros, helping them master their mind to elevate performance. In this episode, we're going to talk about the true meaning of mindset, coaches' impact on athletes, and give you some specific strategies to master your mind. Adalyne, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yes. So let's just start off with, can you share a little bit about your background in sports and what inspired you to specialize in sports psychology and mental skills coaching?
Absolutely. So I was a highly competitive gymnast for quite a while and had really big ambitions in that sport. And I experienced so many different mental hurdles and mental blocks through my athletic career. And going through that athletic career, I wish I had this extra mental support that just I didn't, honestly. And leaving that sport due to injury, I came to a place where I knew I wanted to get back to athletes. I knew I wanted to work in a field where I could support those athletes. And I found performance psychology and realized what an absolute necessity it is for all athletes. And it's something that I wish I would have had through my career. And it launched me into where I am now because I know the need for it because I was an athlete who needed it at one point as well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and tell me, so tell me about the mindset piece, because I know mindset is a word that we get thrown around a lot nowadays. So like from your perspective, what even is mindset, or that those mental skills? Like what does that actually mean and why is it so important for athletes?
Absolutely. Mindset, like you said, is really thrown around. And a lot of times, what people mean when they say mindset is usually a person's perspective or perception of a situation. It's how they're going about noticing the world around them. And what that looks like and how that impacts our performance is basically it's the lens that we view the world in. And if you're looking at the world through these gray glasses that are telling you everything you're doing is wrong, nothing's good enough, you need to work a million times harder because none of your hard work is paying off yet, you're going to be put into this really tough position where you're not performing nearly as well as you could be. You're eliminating all of this really great hardwiring our brain has that leans into positive reinforcement and the natural things that our body does to support us with our motivation, with our confidence, with our drive, with our consistency. You're basically cutting yourself at the knees and giving yourself an uphill battle with that type of perception. And it's so much more than that, and there's so many more details to it, but essentially when you boil mindset down, it's your perception and it's your ability to control that perception. And that's really where my expertise comes in, because it's one thing to understand what your perception looks like and understand the type of perception you want to have. It's a whole other thing to get there. And so finding a way to figure out where you are first off the bat and figure out a way to support you and help you manage any situation you come across. That's basically the bread and butter for every single athlete. I don't care what sport you're in, what level you're at, what gender you are. None of it matters. If you have a control over your mindset, there's going to be a significant elevation in your performance capabilities.
Would you say it's a way to work smarter, not harder?
Absolutely. It gives like that's the best way to describe it. It just kicks in all of, like I said, these natural things that your brain has going for you. And as soon as you switch that perception to something a little bit more productive and a little bit more supportive, honestly, it gives you the opportunity to kind of ride that snowball in a really positive way and help everything kind of click all in one, physically and mentally, especially on performance days.
Yeah. That's good. There's a lot of, this is, again, this is one of those ways that you don't have to work insanely hard to do something. I mean, you do need to work hard, but like there's a point, like you're saying, like there's a point where we need to shift, our mindset. I'm reading the book 10x is easier than 2x, and that's
Yeah.
a lot. You know that book?
Good one.
Yeah, it's being able to focus on what actually matters. Like, are you doing all these things that aren't actually helping you, and really focus on, again, mindset is one of those things that's going to help you 10x your potential. Like, again, that's why I say separates the D1 from the D3. Like, yeah, there's some physical things there, but a lot of those, I mean, you look at Aaron Donald, who's 5'11 and still became a Hall of Famer and was doubted, all these things. And it came down to that mindset and what he did in his work ethic to succeed.
Absolutely. A lot of athletes are kind of white knuckling their experience through their sport and trying to figure out how to get to the next level, and they're doing all these fantastic things, but like I said before, they cut themselves off at the knees, and there's things that they tend to miss out on and work against their natural biology.
Yeah. So I want to read a quote along these lines that you had written on Twitter that stuck out to me. So having a strong and resilient mindset isn't a series of complex changes or leaning on bumper sticker slogans. It looks like consistently supporting a winning mindset, making those little adjustments day in and day out. Can you riff on that one a bit?
Absolutely. It's basically what we just talked about, where what I see two problems happening with athletes all the time when they're trying to support and adjust their mindset is one, they think they need this life altering personality change and basically like a whole personality transplant to some extent to get to the headspace that they want to get to, or they read a motivational quote somewhere or see someone do like a kind of hoorah kind of speech and are like, yep, I'm ready to go. And they're motivated for about 3 seconds and it wears off by the time they get to the gym. And so they get put into these two categories without really having the understanding of what it takes to actually like change that mindset, change that perception, and be able to find that control over how they approach things. And it really, like I said, it looks like making those tiny little decisions daily. It's not a one-time decision. It's not a snap of your fingers and you're switch to this different headspace. It's consistently understanding, okay, my headspace wasn't working for me right here. I need to make an adjustment here. A lot of the things that I work with my athletes don't sound too crazy or difficult because they're not, but they athletes find struggle with them because it's a consistent daily battle, and it's something that they have to hold full accountability to, because it's not always like something they can check off their list. It's not weights that they can go lift. It's kind of turning that viewpoint inwards and taking a minute for some introspection to figure out where they are and what they need to do differently mentally. And that leads to things that they need to do differently or things they need to continue to do physically. And so it's just those, it's a lot of consistency and a lot of those daily changes to support where they're trying to go, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, that's good. So on the adjustments piece on that, so I was listening to Ed Milet, Brendan Bouchard. They just like released an episode, and it was really good podcast episode. And one of the things they talked a lot about was like failures, and
Mm.
so they talk about failures and those adjustments from those failures or those setbacks or whatever you might call it. But what are some things that stick out to you in terms of, again, back to the adjustments and those daily actions? How does failure play into that one?
Yeah, failure is a big one. That's something that athletes really struggle with because we've been kind of ingrained in us since we were little that after a failure happens that we kind of need to like grit and bear it almost kind of thing. It's like take a minute to like really like hound on yourself and then go try again. And a lot of times that doesn't usually work. It puts you in a position where you actually start to fear failure, which doesn't sound that bad all off the bat, but when you're putting yourself in a position where you start to feel failure, you really take your potential for success and throw it out the window. Every great athlete experiences a whole bunch of failure. And the main difference I notice between those good athletes and those great athletes are the great athletes know how to lean into that failure and know how to get back up after it and go pursue a new set of failures, because that means they're growing. If you aren't failing, you are staying inside your bubble of your own capabilities, and there just flat out won't be growth. And so those daily adjustments around failure need to be in a pursuit of what you're trying to do, not what you're trying to avoid. And I see this constantly in my athletes, that they say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want this to happen. It's like, okay, yeah, we don't want those things to happen, but that is clouding your entire headspace. And that is where your brain is focused on. And it's kind of like a car, our brain is. When we are focused on one thing, that's the direction we're going to go. So you are putting yourself in a position that you are far more likely to make mistakes when you're focused on them, rather than shifting and making those little daily adjustments to what you want to be focused on, which is form or specific headspaces that you're going for, or different environments or goals that you're shooting for in that practice or that game. It's putting you in that position to kind of put failure in like the back seat a little bit, and have you have an understanding that it's kind of inevitable, but you're in control of that and you know how to navigate through that failure and to a point where you'll be able to overcome it.
Yeah, that's good. So I know this is going to closely tie to my what I want to talk about next, and I think this is again one of those important things that our audience needs to hear. These student athletes really need to hear, and I would say the parents, the coaches, like they need to hear this. Is what's the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset? This is something again where I see coaches, like I was listening to coaches even just within the last couple of weeks, who very much lived in that fixed mindset, players, and parents a lot too. So can you dig into that?
Growth versus fixed mindset is something that I find myself battling constantly. And the more that you realize that what it looks like and that kind of exists in our world, the more often you see it, unfortunately. But that fixed mindset really looks like kind of an inability or an unwillingness to kind of seek that growth. And it looks like a lot of athletes who kind of put themselves in a position where they feel like they're good. They don't need that extra support. They don't need that extra push, but every single athlete needs that pursuit of growth. Kobe Bryant is one of my favorite examples of this. There is no situation where he was ever content or ever comfortable with his level of success. He pursued growth and success so that he could prove to himself what he could do and kind of show off his human ability essentially, and prove to himself that he could do it. And that is the epitome of that growth mindset. We want to be constantly in pursuit of growth, whatever that looks like for us. And that looks like leaning on the people around us. That looks like taking a hard look at where we're at and where we need to be and what that deficit looks like. That looks like constantly seeking new learning materials and new sources of support, and looking at the people around us to see if they're supporting us in that. But a lot of people get stuck into that fixed mindset because it's a lot safer. And a lot of times I see athletes find that comfortability in that fixed mindset, because if you feel like you're good and you don't need extra support, or you don't need to grow much more, it means that like you're kind of set on failure. Like you've avoided it, you're good, you're at the top. But in reality, you're going to get lapped real quick. There is no situation where people around you aren't working harder or trying to pursue the place that you might be at. And so and I see this also a lot with a lot of high school athletes when they are in a situation where, or even collegiate, but they find themselves in a position where they're kind of like top of their school. They have an offer that they're excited about, so they feel like they're good. They have a cakewalk into that starting position. But in reality, they get there and the people around them are just as good, if not better. And the difference is those people over the summer have been working and they've kind of taken that summer off because they feel like they're in a good position. And so usually that fixed mindset looks like a whole lot of comfortability, kind of veiled in some concern with taking a look at what they need to do more of.
Yeah. We're laughing because we were literally just giving like even just specific examples before we came on of like, yeah, there are athletes that live in that fixed mindset. So actually I want to ask something along this. So
Yeah.
what does failure look like for a growth minded athlete versus fixed minded? And then what does success look like for a growth versus fixed mindset? Like how do they deal with it?
Absolutely. I love that question. So, for athletes in a position where they feel fixed, failure is end of the world. It is catastrophic because it kind of puts a little ding in this armor that they've put up that they're good, and failure kind of puts that into question, right? And for success for someone with a fixed mindset just means being able to kind of skirt that failure a little bit. It means that they feel like they've kind of accomplished it, they accomplish their goals and they feel like they're at a position that they don't need to set new ones. Whereas my growth minded athletes, they're in a position where failure is an opportunity for learning. And I love when I see athletes get to this point where I talk to them after a situation that didn't go their way and they face a little bit of failure and they're like, yeah, it was tough, but I learned this is what I want to do next time. And that's like music to my ears because I know that they're using that as a huge opportunity to grow and get better. And that failure was honestly a blessing for them because it put them in a position to not face that type of failure again and get a whole lot better. And success looks like constantly beating themselves. Usually athletes in a growth mindset are people who compete against themselves rather than the people around them, and that also puts them in a really good position to continue to grow and get better, because as soon as you turn your attention to your opponent, sometimes your opponents aren't going to be that good and you're going to watch yourself and your level fall to their capabilities really quickly. And so it's always important to use yourself as that competition and constantly try to one up yourself. And that's what I see with my growth mindset athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that because like especially on the success piece or the success piece because I had a Brady Sins, he's a D1 runner. He's the first guest on the podcast and he talked about how he wasn't just comparing himself, like he wasn't just focused on the kids in his school or whatever. He even started building relationships with people from other schools because he wanted to bring himself up to a higher standard. And so yeah,
That's awesome. I love that.
yeah. Um, so let's get into the coaches piece because I know this can be, like I said, a real challenge, and so like coaches can be really really harsh sometimes, but some of that intensity I feel like can be used for growth. But where do coaches draw the line in this? Like what should they avoid doing to put their athletes more into that growth mindset versus fixed?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a fine line with that type of like harshness and intensity for those coaches to best support their athletes. And the tricky part for coaches is they're often not coaching just one athlete. Usually they got a whole bunch of them, and everybody responds to different types of coaching super differently. And so it's kind of hard to judge. But I always say that if a coach is coming at that intensity or harshness with the intention to help their athletes grow and a clear understanding of what they're looking for, then they're kind of in the clear. Usually if the line kind of gets crossed and there creates a little bit of a detriment, and sometimes worst case scenarios, it creates a fear of failure in their athletes when it isn't that failure is berated in a way that there's no clear understanding of what they should have done better. It's just you did bad, do it differently next time, not here, let's walk through how to fix it and make it better for next time. Of course, like I said, it doesn't always need to sound as gentle as that, but as long as the athlete has that clear vision, they're in a good place. And that this is where extra support systems are vital, because coaches can't support every single athlete's needs at all times, and they can't always be adjusting their coaching style for each individual athlete's need. And so having that support system of people like me and people like you to be able to support their athletes behind the scenes a little bit, and give them extra resources and delegate in those situations is really, really vital.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of them too, like building a good support staff just within their team too. Like you got to have the right coaches under you that are going to support that as well and be a part of that vision. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What about how can the coaches build a better team culture that still instills more of that growth mindset?
Yeah. Uh, Again, this looks different for every team, but creating a system of support and consistency and accountability are usually, those are kind of the three things for recipes for success. With that accountability, that doesn't always just look like accountability from the coaches, but it looks like finding that in each other and in themselves, and getting to that point where that on and off field cohesion looks like those athletes wanting to fight for each other and show up for each other. Then that consistency piece sometimes gets overlooked, but it's really important for athletes mindsets when they understand what they're going to expect when they walk into a practice or to a game. It's hard for coaches or people too. The emotional regulation isn't always easy when games are tough or athletes aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. But if an athlete knows that if this happens, this is what my coach is going to do, regardless of what that looks like, and they show up pretty similar to how they did the day before and the week before, it creates a really good sense of security and understanding for those athletes. So again, they can put themselves in a position where they know what they're aiming for, and creating that sense of support, like I said, through either outside staff or even internally, it creates a place where those athletes feel understood. And an interesting study I was just looking at talked about basically turnover rates in athletes, and the number one turnover rate was due to athletes not feeling like they were understood or supported essentially off the field. And so when they're just athletes that are disposable to their coaches, it creates a really quick exit plan for those athletes, and it puts them in a position where they don't want to come back. And so finding that support system in a coaching staff is invaluable.
Yeah. I think about that with the transfer portal and just how it is nowadays, and I'm like, yes, part of it sure is that people haven't developed some of that resilience, but some of it could be just the environment too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot we could talk about with that transfer
Yeah, that's a whole nother, yeah.
whole nother
Yeah.
podcast to get into.
Yes. Yeah, well, I definitely going to bring you back because there's a lot of things we can unpack for sure. But let's get into, I want to get into like exercises, techniques, things that the athletes can kind of implement into some of their routines. And so you talk a lot about the importance of breath work. Can you guide us through just like a simple breath work exercise that athletes can use to enhance their focus and center themselves? Now, if y'all are driving, don't, and she tells you to close your eyes, don't close your eyes, but yeah.
I love it. Yeah, for sure. So I'm actually going to give you two just for variation reasons. Every athlete looks different, every need is different, but one of the most simple and effective ways to kind of pull athletes into a position where they feel like there is a lot more control and kind of brings their nervous system down to a point of control is a physiological sigh. And it's simply a double inhale through the nose and a big exhale through the mouth. So that looks like, and what that does is it kind of puts you in a position where that, like I said, that nervous system gets told that you're safe and you're sound, and it puts you back into a place where your brain can be thinking logically and put you in a point where your focus is back fully in your control. Now that's one of my favorites because it's quick, simple, and easy. But a lot of times athletes are in a situation where their breath is gold and not something they can spare a whole lot of. And so when that happens, the easiest thing I can tell my athletes is basically to turn to like a slow and low style breathing technique where their main point of focus is getting to a point where they can exclusively be breathing through their nose and their exhales look longer than their inhales. And this does pretty much the same thing at a heightened situation. So when your breath feels really shallow and you're fatigued because you're on the field and you're trying to catch your breath and your brain's scrambled, the second that you start to put yourself in a position where you're at least doing in through the nose, out through the mouth, and those exhales are even a millisecond longer, you're giving yourself the opportunity to recover a whole lot faster physically, and then also giving yourself some room mentally to figure out what you're trying to do and make sure you're making the most of your situation.
I like those. The thing I think about with both of those is, even with, again, since I'm so fresh in mind with the 10x 2x, is like you're taking in good stuff, yes, but you're also getting rid of a lot more bad stuff than you are bringing in the good stuff. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what happens usually when athletes are physically fatigued is we feel like we need more air, right? We feel like we need more oxygen, and that's where those big like gasp air gulps come from. But in reality, our CO2 is just too high. And so when we start gasping for air, it puts us in a situation where that balance is just off, but our oxygen is just bumping up, and that makes our heart beat faster and puts us in tough positions. And so as you exhale, you're bringing out that CO2, all that bad stuff, and putting yourself in a position where that blood oxygen regulates a whole lot more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. Now what about, because I know you talk about off season a bit as well, and I know this is like a lot of athletes are in off season right now. We're recording in summertime, either you're in travel ball, but you're not in your main season right now. No, a lot of people are like, is there an off season? It's like, well, kind of. But what are some things athletes can do during the off season to mentally prepare for game day?
Absolutely. I love off season for the opportunity for athletes to really like dive into that growth mindset space and use it for an opportunity to build and grow substantially. And one of the most effective ways to do that, and one of the simplest ways to do that, is setting clear cut goals for your off season. So taking a good look at what your season looked like and what some strengths were and what some areas that you want to grow in look like and where you want to be next, the start of next season, and figuring out what needs to happen between there. A lot of athletes kind of stop there. They'll get to a point where they're like, all right, well, next season I want to look like this, this, and this. And then they're like, okay, go into my off season and feel it out and hopefully I'll get there kind of thing, with fingers crossed and some white knuckling.
Mhm.
uh, but often athletes don't see the results that they want from that. And so the best way to kind of put those goals into practice and actually reach them, and usually reach multiple levels above that, is through setting some more weekly and like tangible goals throughout their time. So if that means that you're trying to work on your shot, that means, okay, well, maybe you need to go get extra shots in before your practice that day, or maybe that means working on your form, or maybe that means watching film on people, but putting in those practical steps so that it's not just like, okay, this is what I want to do, and now I forget about it for the next 3 months. It's practical daily things that are helping you actually get there. And the difference I see in my athletes when they do this versus when they don't, it's crazy, because those athletes I will be setting goals with 5 more times throughout their off season compared to the athletes who aren't doing that. And it's always real easy to tell because I'll always check in. I'm like, how's this going? And they say good. And then they talk about some other areas that they're growing in, and but it's real vague. And then the athletes who are on their P's and Q's and setting up those daily goals and figuring out what they want to do and how they're going to get there, we fly through goals because their growth is just exponential, because it's pointed, it's focused, it's using all of those biological things we talked at the beginning, and using that support to kind of propel them a whole lot faster, and like I said, riding that snowball.
Yeah. It's back. I mean, right back to the consistent, like everything you've said today, like overlaps it with that consistency
Yeah.
concept, that the idea of just being consistent, and this is something that I try to talk about with athletes on weekends too. It's like, don't, or off days, like, don't not
Yeah.
do anything. Like, yeah, you can rest, but actively rest, like do things, whether it be the mental piece, whether it be trying to eat consistently. Don't eat just 2 meals on your days off if you're trying to get bigger, like,
Yeah.
things like that. So it's that
Absolutely.
consistent action. Yeah.
Always. It's everything. It's every component of an athlete needs to find some level of consistency, and athletes get scared with that sometimes because it sounds big and scary, but as soon as you put it into practice, they become habits, and it doesn't look any different than what your normal day looks like. It's just better habits now.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about brushing your teeth, one time it was hard, or tying your shoes. I actually just watched a video, guy like tying his shoes without even looking, and he's like, thinking about when the first time I tied my shoes, it was stressful. I got frustrated, couldn't do it. But after you do it for a while, it's like you don't even have to look.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I love that. A good
Uh, Yeah. What about injuries? Because I know this is another thing that can really mess with an athlete's mental game, especially when they are trying to go far in their sport. And so, what strategies do you recommend for athletes to maintain their confidence, their resilience during that recovery process?
Absolutely. So, one of the biggest things I see with athletes through injury is a lack of control. They feel like they are in the passenger seat of their sports experience, and they feel like they're kind of getting left on the sidelines of everybody else around them. And that's the one piece that through our work together, I try to give athletes back, because there is a whole lot of control to be taken over injury. It usually just gets left on the table. And so a lot of times that looks like creating essentially a version of a schedule of all the things that they can be doing, and all the things that are within their control that they need to be doing to get to a point where they come back better, faster, stronger. And that looks like breaking it down in a couple different ways, and making them stay on top of all the things that they need to be doing. A lot of athletes look at their injury as an opportunity to kind of like take a step back. Well, not necessarily an opportunity, but they're forced to take a step back, and so they're like, all right, well, I'm just gonna sit, wait, and rest. And that usually doesn't work out for them the best. And so when we find a routine and a schedule for them that looks very proactive, it puts them in a much better headspace, because one, they have that control back, and then two, it puts them back in a position where they feel like a lot of familiarity from when they're healthy, because athletes' schedule, as we know, are very built out and very planned for them. And when you put them in a situation with injury, that schedule gets ripped out from underneath them pretty quickly. And so putting them in a situation where they create their own schedule, and they're in control of what they're doing, and they know that there are options. It doesn't matter what your injury is or what stage of your injury is, there are always things you can be doing. That's never a question. And a lot of athletes forget that. And so keeping them on top of that and making sure that they keep moving forward with those goals is one of the most detrimental things in keeping them in a good headspace. And it's really cool to see those athletes will always come back better than they were before, because they've used that time really wisely, and used that opportunity to take that control.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And there's a lot more I want to get into, even on the injuries piece, but I know time wise, like we'll definitely save that for another podcast. I feel like just like a podcast on that resiliency piece. I think we can make a whole podcast episode just on like resilience.
Yeah, for
So we'll definitely make note of that for the future. But just to kind of wrap up with a few questions, there's a lot of great stuff from this, a lot of things you guys can implement, but what would be one thing, Adalyne, that you would give to athletes, like one piece of advice you would give to strengthen their mind and mental resilience?
Yeah. One of the simplest things that I usually always start my athletes on is documenting their thoughts a little bit more consistently. And the athletes always kind of look at me funny when I tell them to do this, because it feels a
Very.
little, yeah. But it looks like, honestly, if you're having a thought that doesn't suit you or isn't being productive for you in that moment, we want to see it, because usually those thoughts kind of go behind the curtain and we don't notice that they're going on. And that's where they wreak the most havoc. And so as soon as you put them on a piece of paper in front of you, there's a lot more steps that we'll put into place together, but on your own, your brain's naturally going to create a lot of those changes and create a lot of support systems for yourself that gets you out of that really quickly and helps you find, again, like that sense of control over your perception and what those thoughts look like. And so start reviewing your day, what felt good, what didn't feel good, and what those thoughts sounded like, and you're going to see a whole bunch of difference. That's another big piece with the growth versus fixed mindset components is review is one of the easiest and most effective ways to build and get better, is taking a second to just pause and see how the day went, and that goes unnoticed and unused by a whole bunch of athletes, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Man, there, like I said, there is just so much that we can. I mean, I'm gonna rewatch this and like take notes myself on like the things I need to do. But yeah. What about books wise? I know we mentioned like one or two today, but what are some books you would recommend specifically for student athletes to read?
Yeah. One of the most recommended books I have is The Mindful Athlete by George Mumford. It is a quick, simple read. It's not anything too complex, but it kind of gets you into that headspace of understanding what it looks like to take a little bit of that sense of control back in your mindset and find that pursuit of success rather than that fear of failure. And so it's a really good one, especially for those younger athletes.
Yeah, good. And then yeah, that's always the challenge, is like I read a lot of good mindset books, but I'm like, oh, this one's gonna be above their heads a little bit.
I have some real dense reads. If anyone wants them, I can give you some real dense reads.
I just read the book Mindset. I'm like, that's one of those where I'm like, I don't think that's a high school level, but it is so good.
Yeah.
And then for you though, like I know that a lot of people listening to this are going to be like, yeah, I need that kind of expertise, or I want to, pick up some things. Where can they follow your work and learn more about what you have to offer?
Yeah. So Twitter, Instagram, and my website are all my name, Adalyne Fettig. Twitter, Instagram.com. So I'm pretty easy to reach that way. And yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll put those in the show notes as well. So, as you guys are listening, check the little caption below. You guys will see easy links to those as well. But yeah, Adalyne, thank you so much for joining us today. Your work is so needed in sports and really just in life in general. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. And I told y'all this was going to be good. Y'all, your body won't succeed if you can't fix your mind. So get your mind right, train it, be consistent, and again, connect with experts like Adalyne so that you can recognize those things that are holding you back and be able to upgrade that mind and get better. And so, yeah, again, until next time, keep striving for greatness.